Hello once again and welcome back to Mondays on Mondays. I'm the CDH Dad and
the CDH Warrior.
And we welcome you on this Labor Day, Monday. And we are actually doing this on Labor Day. Just for the disclaimer that we typically try and put at the beginning of each of these, we are not medical professionals. We don't have backgrounds in psychology or any of the social
sciences,
anything like that. Nothing in the medical profession, but we are experienced for almost 3 decades now with a son who was a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, CDH, and then I had a daughter who was aplastic anemia and required a bone marrow stem cell transplant and the complications of that. So for, as I said, nearly 30 years, we've gone through how to live life with children that have some unique physical issues, medical issues, and how we go through life. When we started this, we didn't have social media. Now we've got a lot more capabilities out there and a lot more options to discuss these things. So we started this as a forum so that we would have a place where we could relate some of our experiences, try and help to at least raise some questions and hopefully provide some assistance to families that are going through these type situations and help you in that aspect. So welcome back once again to Mondays on Mondays.
With that, let's roll the title.
And welcome back once again to Mondays on Mondays. As I've said before, we typically try and address issues that we see either through questions that come in through emails or through what we see in social media, where we're active on several sites. And the CDH Warrior here is active in nonprofits for congenital diaphragmatic hernia. So we see a lot of those type things. And typically the questions that come up there are more for parents with children that have just been diagnosed or are just involved in some of these issues. So these are dealing with infants, in some cases children that are still in utero and answering the parents' questions there, or as Drew said, in toddlers and young children and how they're going through their development and physical issues and those addressed. But in our discussions this week, one of the things we thought we should address is how do we handle that tween teen stage with our children and families that have these unique medical anomalies, and how do you handle that in normal life when you're going into the teenage years, adolescence, and what are the impacts there? So some of the things we want to address is there are going to be some physical issues that we want to address, because as a child grows and physically changes, sometimes that can impact the repairs that may have been done. Also some of the anomalies, because you've got a lot of changes in the physical, but also in the hormones that are taking place and how those impact in that place. How you deal with the social impact of this, because even though your child has had repairs or medical treatments and those type of things, there are still some stigmas that come into play that you have to deal with, and those become particularly more involved in the teenage years, and you're dealing with other teenagers and they're dealing with other teenagers, and how does that address with them, and into their long-term development goals, objectives, those type of things. So that's part of what we wanted to address in today's topics. First, just for the simple point of it, on the physical changes is, as I said, I'm dealing with congenital biopneumatic hernia, aplastic anemia, bone marrow transplant. With a CDH situation, as the body grows and continues to move, many cases these children have had to have physical repairs of their diaphragms. They had a hole in the diaphragm. In many cases, it allowed internal organs to go up into the chest cavity. There were issues there. These were repaired in young years, but as these children grow and develop and their bodies grow and develop, this can put a strain on those patches and issues. And this is a time when many cases have reherniation and issues, in which case there may be an opening in the diaphragm. In general cases, it's not necessarily noticeable. There may be some lung reduction in lung capacity, those things. The biggest concern is if there's any migration of, in particular, the intestines, the colon, any internal organs that can escape into the chest cavity through those gaps. So it's something that needs to be watched and monitored, and this is where you need to work very closely with your medical professionals and discuss this in the annual physical examinations to see what's going on.
I was going to jump in on, I want to jump in on this because one of the other things that I see a lot of, and most people don't think about it, but in CDH, we've had to move organs down. A lot of those organs have been manipulated, scarred. One of the big issues that I see, especially in the teen years, is, and this is boys and girls both that have this issue, is scar tissue and intestinal blockages.
Right.
I've seen both in the groups that I've been in.
Right, and that's part of where we've talked in the past about the physical things, is you want to make sure that you monitor the cardiopulmonary, in particular the diaphragm and the lung function, the cardio, just to make sure that the heart doesn't show any impact, because it's going to be moved around in the chest cavity as these repairs are done. The GI tract, because, as you mentioned, the intestines, the colon, all of those things have been manipulated, so you can have twisting, turning, scar tissue, those type of things that can cause issues there.
And a lot of these things don't necessarily present until later years.
Right. And then you want to be to check just to make sure the endocrine system, those type of things, that there's no impact there because you've manipulated the other organs, the livers, the kidneys, the spleen, those type of things that can have an impact. So those are things on the physical aspect that you need to deal with. But then we also, I think the key point today is kind of talking about the social type situation, the general lifestyle situations, because with these physical issues, there are going to be restrictions in some of the activities and some of the things that your child can do and your family can do. In general, you want to, talk with your medical professional and find out what limitations they would recommend in terms of activities. I know in your case it was one, you could be physically active in just about anything just to avoid physical contact sports.
Yeah.
Just because of concern about any damage that could be impacted from that. And that can cause problems of, okay, well, you can't go out for the football team. But if you really look at schools and those things, only a small percentage of the student body become involved in the football team and those athletics. Yes, it's something you'd like to do, but there's no reason you can't go out and be active in other things. I know you didn't necessarily do the neighborhood football and those type things, but I know you had a group that did frisbee football and those type things. So it was limited physical contact, limited impact, but could still have fun. And that's the important thing, is children need to be involved in the social activities as much as possible with other kids that age. One of the things we saw, not necessarily from a child that had the physical, but had some other birth defects that came into play, is the parents wanted to restrict and limit their activities in normal items, involved in a scouting program, but well, they couldn't do the hikes, they couldn't do various things, they didn't want to do these things. And the child was driving some of that activity or inactivity because they just didn't feel comfortable doing some of these things. And because of that, the parents were allowing that to happen. In some cases, you need to push your child to get involved in things. I'm not saying that you need to get active in, your child's going to be on the soccer team and doing these things. But they need to go out and play normal activities with normal kids in the neighborhood, be involved with those people, and try and be as actively normal and socially normal as possible. And that was one of the things my wife and I did, is tried to make sure that we involved our kids in a lot of different activities that would do this. These are twofold. I mean, you were involved in the scouting program, plus the church programs, things like that, which gave you that social interaction, but it also pushed some physical interaction. I know there were some physical activities that were difficult, but you had no trouble going on hiking and most of the other activities, going camping for the weekend, going to summer camp, those type things, which are normal youth activities that can be involved. In my daughter's case, we had a twofold capability there, was that she started out in dance very young. Part of the reason we went into dance was for the physical activity. It added to the occupational therapy and physical therapy that was being provided and helped her develop after an extended period of time of being inactive while having to be in the hospital for the bone marrow transplant and all of the activities there. So these are the type of things you look at, and that gave her a physical outlet, but it also gave a social outlet, because there were a lot of people she met and got involved with and became friends with that helped there. Again, with the church and the scouting programs, there are a lot of activities out there that you can help your child become involved with. I know in our case, in the neighborhood we were in, it was a neighborhood that had a lot of children similar age. And even though there was some limited contact there, because some went to some went to private schools and different activities like that. Some were private schools, some were public schools, some were homeschooled. But there were also interactions where the kids could get involved and still maintain the contact. And with the social media and some of those things, even though we have moved, because we moved when you were in your teenage years, you still maintain contact with a lot of those people that you grew up with and people you've met along the way. And this is an important part of just normal life development and normal childhood growth from adolescence into adulthood. And these are the things, as parents, you need to keep in mind that, yes, your child may have some restrictions, but the important thing is to do as much as you can as possible to maintain normal activities. You had a comment.
I was going to comment, and considering I'm 28 years old, some of them are even parents themselves.
Yes.
So I just kind of wanted to point that out, that the cycle continues. That it's not just...
Yeah, and then how do people...
How do we
that would be
continue
one
to keep...
later on, is how do survivors of these issues, CDH, bone marrow transplant, aplastic anemia, graft versus host, all of these type things, how do they develop and become as normal as possible as parents? So I think that would be a good topic for later on. And I know we recently had a young lady similar age to you who has just had a child who was a CDH survivor.
Mm-hmm.
So that may be an impact for her to be able to provide some input into is, okay, how do you grow up through a life where you've got issues, the physical issues, you've gone through the growth phases, you've gone through the medical issues, those type things. Then how do you maintain into a, quote, normal family life as a parent? Because it can have some impact. You know, how you're raised makes a difference in how you work as a parent.
Yeah.
So that could be a good topic for some later point in time. I think the other thing that is we need to at least touch on is the psychological impacts of this, because even though your child won't remember the medical issues that they went through in their early life, anything that impacted them in elementary school into junior high and high school years that was related to their physical condition is also going to have an impact on the psychological condition.
Yeah.
And this is where it's very important to maintain a dialogue within the family. You know, this has been a lot of years. We still talk about this.
Yeah.
But now we're kind of talking about this in the past tense. And we're trying to make sure that the physical issues, the medical conditions as a child, spending periods of time in the hospital, it's going to affect the parents psychologically. I actually just did a little post that I put out because it was NICU month.
Yeah.
September is NICU month.
NICU Awareness Month.
Right, which is Neonatal Intensive Care Unit Awareness Month. And, you know, we spent essentially 3 months in the NICU with you, but combined between you and your sister, we had basically 9 months that we spent in a hospital environment and living in different parts of that. And that's going to have an impact on you as a parent and as a family and how you grow as a family. So these are the type of things that, you know, I don't necessarily have the best answer on how to deal with those, but these are the, you know, as described sometimes, the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
It's something that's there. It's something you deal with. You have to deal with it as a family, as a parent, and the child and children involved in that. But then you also have to deal with that in the nuclear family, the parents and the children, and also the extended family and the friend network that you deal with. And understanding that, yes, this was an issue. Yes, we will talk about it, but we don't try to dwell upon that.
Yeah.
So that's where you get into the important thing. Yes, it was a period of time that you spent 2 to 4 years with medical restrictions and issues there. You had some other issues that may or may not have been related to that a few years later, as you know, as you grew.
Yeah.
But those are just a couple of milestones, but they are not to be the thing that you build your life on. So I think that's the critical part of what we wanted to talk about is, you know, by the time, if you've got a child that's newborn, toddler phase, elementary phase that has medical conditions and things you have to deal with, is when you get to that teenage stage, that's a critical time for the social, mental, and psychological issues that you need to make sure that you address and maintain those. And if you see psychological issues that come to play, talk with your doctor about that. Find some of the resources that are available in your community that you can utilize to help you work through that. Because once you recognize there's an issue, the sooner you can deal with having to resolve that issue, the better it is for the long term. So I think that's in general what we wanted to talk about today. Anything else that you've got?
One thing that I wanted to touch on, because I don't think we really touched on it much. I touched on it, I think, in one of my earlier videos. But somebody brought up, and my mom kind of dismissed this when I brought it up to her, but survivor's guilt can be a major impact.
Right.
Direct or indirect.
Yeah. Because I know within the nonprofit group you're involved with, you're dealing with survivors, what is it, CDH Heroes and Angels?
Stars and Angels.
Stars and Angels. Stars are those that have survived. Angels are those that have passed. And I had not really thought about the details of survivor's guilt, because within that site you see a lot of families that have lost children.
Lost even older children.
Yeah.
I know I've seen two that were in their teen years that passed from health issues related to CDH, not CDH itself.
Right. So that would be a topic for a later point, is to discuss the survivor's guilt and having to deal with the psychological impact of that. So I think that's a good topic for later on. Anyway.
All right.
Thank you for joining us for Mondays on Mondays. Have a great Labor Day and a wonderful rest of your week.
Have a great day. See you next time.